Secret of the Mimic finally came out, and just about everyone in the community has been losing their collective minds over what it's done to the lore. Tales games got taken out back, Afton became the biggest fraud in the series overnight, and by the grace of the gods, there is now a theory floating around known as God David. But today, we're not going to be talking about any of those things. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to talk about the legitimately awful decisions Scott has made with both the books and the story as a whole, but instead, we're going to talk about something that I think Scott has been cooking for a long time now. Today, I present to you the Freddy Fazburger. But first, a question. Why can you find the Mimic suits underneath Freddy Fazbear's pizza place in Ruin? Leave your answers in the comments, make sure you like and subscribe while you're down there, and without further ado, let's get into things. This is a theory that's been cooking in the back of my mind for a long time now. Almost an entire year ago, I uploaded a short talking about how weird the geography of the series is. To keep a short story even shorter, I think it's really weird that the Pizzaplex has a recreation of Mike's room in it, and that there's a scooper in the area underneath it. It seems a little familiar to me. Because of this, there was always a really cursed thought in the back of my head. What if this wasn't a recreation of Mike's room? And what if that scooper we see wasn't a new scooper? What if these two things were the same ones we saw way back in Sister Location? Well, as it turns out, Secret of the Mimic would unintentionally give me some answers for this. Specifically, the trailers that we got in the days before its release. This was one of the first times we actually got a good look at the inside of MCM, and on stream, we noticed some really interesting things. Specifically, right here. This wall and the light on it reminded us of something. It looks exactly like what we see in Ruin. Now, by all means, in isolation, this looks purely coincidental. I mean, these games are, what, 50 years apart? There's no way they can actually be connected, right? Not like these two areas have anything else in common with each other. Except, well, they do have things in common with each other, because outside of Secret of the Mimic, this area in Ruin is the only other area where we see Mimic and all of his costumes. Nowhere else in this entire series do we see any of these things. I can believe things looking similar is a coincidence, but when they look similar and they store the same costumes, that's where I start raising an eyebrow. This is what really started me down the idea that there might be something here, and the conclusion I came to was that almost every location we see in this series is built on the same plot of land. That raises a lot of logistical questions though, and to answer literally any of them, we should take a step back and try to properly map out everything that we see. We already have quite a few pieces that we're working with, and pretty soon, we're going to be working with even more. First off, at ground level, we have the Mega Pizzaplex, and most notably, inside of it, we have the Afton house, or more specifically, Mike's room. Now, earlier in the video, I talked about the possibility of this being Mike's actual room from Sister Location, and I don't know how possible that actually is. Assuming that Mike lives in the house on the hill in Sister Location, I don't see how the actual room could be here, since it's on the ground level of the Pizzaplex. It still doesn't change how weird it is, though. Anyway, onto the first layer down, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, otherwise known as the FNaF 6 location. I know that we've all kind of accepted that this is down here, but to be honest with you, I still don't think that we've talked about it enough, because by all means, it makes literally zero sense that this is here. Even the people who were actually building the Pizzaplex were concerned about unsteady ground, because building on top of this was already an absolutely terrible idea. And as for why they did that, well, we never really came to a good answer. But we'll get into that part a little bit later. Let's talk about the next layer. Henry's Labyrinth. This is where the FNaF 6 fire happened. The labyrinth of smells and sounds. For some reason, Burn Trap is down here, and please don't ask me about this thing. My life is a lot better when I don't think about it. I also think that this is probably where the blob was formed. Technically, we see it at the bottom of the previous layer, along with the Nightmare Staff bots, but if the blob is the remnant/agony creature that I think it is, then it probably came to life down here. On to the third layer down. If my theory is correct, then this area is none other than Murray's Costume Manor, or at least some of it. I think quite a bit was lost in the sinkhole, as well as all of the construction that's happened to the area. But what we're left with are the most important bits. The Mimic, and quite a few of his costumes that we also see in Secret of the Mimic. We also see the Scooper, which you all know how I feel about this thing. I've talked about this thing more than enough though, so I won't spend too much time talking about it yet. But you should definitely take note of the fact that it's down here, and that it has yet to be addressed in another game. And finally, the fourth layer down. This is the most interesting layer for me right now because, honestly, we don't know much about it yet. In Ruin, we only know that it exists because Cassie fell down there at the end of the game. But now that we have Secret of the Mimic, we certainly have some stuff to look at. Underneath MCM is the R&D department, as well as this. Proto-Freddy's, as I'll be calling it. Keeping it a buck, this room doesn't make any goddamn sense. Why is it here? Why does it have the FNaF 3 map in it? Why is it shaped like the Help Wanted map? Why are there new spring lock seats? I don't get it. I can't make sense of this room at all. So if you want me to talk more about it, it'll probably be in another video. What I will say about it though, is that quite a bit of it probably still exists on the 4th layer, underneath where the Mimic chases us in Ruin. But again, that's for another video. So that's the current layout of this plot of land, or as I and all of my friends have been referring to it as, the Fazburger. But I know what a lot of you are probably thinking. I haven't really presented any evidence yet. We know about FNAF 6 being underneath the Pizzaplex, and we know about all the other places underneath it, but what about everything else? Why am I so sure that the area that Mimic chases us in is what's left of MCM? I mean, sure, there's a bit of a logical path there. The chances that Fazbear Entertainment, specifically Henry Emily, grabbed the suits from MCM and put them all underneath the pizza place are extraordinarily low. And on top of that, we know that William Afton didn't actually follow up on his promise of never touching the house Edwin's parents built, since this house definitely becomes the FNAF 4 Nightmare House at some point or another. So it's very likely that the land that MCM is on was eventually built on in some way or another. But that's not exactly evidence. It's just a conclusion drawn from assumptions. I don't think that the assumptions are far-fetched at all. Honestly, I'm 100% convinced of them. But I know that not everyone else is gonna be. So rather than talking about assumptions, let's talk scale. If there's one thing we know about the Pizzaplex, it's that it's absolutely massive. Bigger than anything else we've seen in the entire franchise. But what about MCM? How big is that to scale? Well, actually, we know the answer to that. It was told to us in an interview that MCM is about the size of Roxy Raceway. Now, that seems rather specific, doesn't it? Why is the specific comparison here Roxy Raceway, of all things? Well, let me ask you something. What else do we know about Roxy Raceway? Well, there's one thing in particular that comes to mind. This is where the sinkhole is. You know, the massive sinkhole that leads to everything else underneath the Pizzaplex, including where we find the Mimic and all of his outfits? Yeah, that's all underneath there. That's why Steelable made this comparison in particular. It wasn't some random fact, it was a hint. The reason that MCM is the size of Roxy Raceway is because it was literally made to be that big, so that it could fit underneath it in the giant sinkhole that was specifically formed right there. Fazbear Entertainment has been building around this place for years. Ever since they legally claimed ownership of it all the way back in 1979, they've been building on top of it and using the land for their own establishments. And it's not just Afton that's doing it. Henry is just as guilty of it. Remember, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place is Henry's project, and it's right on top of the Mimic area in Ruin. That means that Henry specifically built on top of this land, and there's no way in hell that was coincidental. So, why'd he do it? Well, it's simple, to burn it all down. That was the whole point of FNAF 6, wasn't it? To gather everything all in one place and burn it all down together, finally ending the nightmare that Afton started all the way back in the 70s? In fact, you can take this interpretation even further. There's been a line in FNAF 6 that's plagued the theorist community for years. A wound first inflicted on me. This is something that Henry said again. And at first, people took this as a hint that Charlie was the first child to be murdered by Afton in the series. But then, we had Withered Chica saying that she was the first in UCN, and the Help Wanted 2 Grave Order putting the puppet at the very end after all the rest of the animatronics. But with this line of thinking, we suddenly have an entirely new interpretation of the line. What if the first wound that William inflicted on Henry wasn't killing Charlie, but instead, it was what happened to Edwin and his company? We know that there was a leaker in MCM, someone who leaked things such as M2 to William. And we know that this person was promised a position managing one of the new locations. Who is the only other person that fits the role of managing a Fazbear location at this point in the timeline? Henry. The first wound wasn't murder, it was corporate espionage. Crime that William Afton held over Henry's head for years, and the reason he was able to get away with so much. Because if Henry ever did something to try and stand against Afton, he had the perfect blackmail in his back pocket, ready to ruin Henry's life at a moment's notice. Okay, that was a little bit of a tangent that led to me accidentally advocating Charlie last and calling Henry complicit in multiple crimes. What was I talking about? Oh, right, the Fazburger. I've given you reason to consider that MCM is underneath the pizza place, which is underneath the pizzaplex, so what about everything else? Just how all-encompassing is this thing? Well, let's start with the most obvious inclusion. Circus Baby's entertainment and rental. If Edwin's house on the hill eventually turns into the Afton house, and the bunker is built underneath the said house, then, naturally speaking, that's somewhere underneath here too. In fact, it would explain the scooper's existence underneath the pizza place even more. It wasn't built from scratch using the blueprints, it's the original model, modified into this for reasons. Further on that point, I don't think that this is the only time that the scooper has been repurposed, because inside of MCM, we have this godforsaken thing. I don't know about the rest of you, but to me, that 100% looks like a scooper. I think that this was the original version of it, eventually repurposed to be what we see in Sister Location. The original purpose of it was probably to get things out of these springlock suits if they were stuck in there, since we know that people were constantly wearing them. There's also a chance that it was built to get the Mimic out of suits, but I'm not entirely sold on that thought yet, especially because I don't know exactly when Mimic 1 was built in this timeline. But anyway, that's Circus Babies being included in the Fazburger, which is on the same layer as everything else in MCM, which is even more evidence for the scooper being built all the way back in the 70s. But that's enough of that. Next game on the list, FNaF 4. Well, there's not much more to say about this one, honestly. With the use of the breaker room map from Sister Location, we can see that most of the major locations from FNaF 4 exist within close proximity of the bunker, and considering how big the pizzaplex is, it's safe to say that all of these locations are also encapsulated in this area. So, the neighborhood from FNaF 4, Fredbear's Family Diner, the Plush Trap area, and even the Nightmare Room are all a part of the Fazburger as well. I'd say that they were all originally on the same layer as the pizza place, but most of the things from it probably got lost during its construction, as well as the sinkhole. There's a chance that they still exist down there, but, well, who knows. Either way, that's not important. On to the next location. Fazbear's Fright from FNaF 3. Not gonna lie, this is the one that I am the most conflicted about. Because while I always thought that it was one of the most disconnected from the rest of the various locations, for some reason, the map for it is underneath MCM in Proto-Freddy's. Does this mean that Fazbear's Fright was planned multiple decades in advance and wasn't actually built until the 2010s? I've been thinking about that ever since the game came out, and I gotta be honest, I have no idea. What I do know is that there actually is some evidence for Fazbear's Fright being brought into the Fazburger, but I'm not super confident in the source of it. It's time to talk about Tails again. Now, I know that earlier in this video I said that Tails Games was dead in the water, but I'd like to at least use it to raise a possibility, rather than claim that everything in it is one-to-one with the games. In Tales from the Pizzaplex, we have a story called Pressure, which features what is essentially a remake of Fazbear's Fright within the Pizzaplex. Of course, this doesn't mean that it also exists within the games, but it's worth noting that we do have FNaF 3 being represented along with the Pizzaplex in some form of media. In fact, you could even argue that the map we see in Proto Freddy's was used as a blueprint for Fazbear's Fright when that eventually got built. I certainly can't imagine any other reason why it would be here after all. And if it was used as a blueprint, then who's to say that it wasn't built somewhere nearby? I'd like to clarify one thing though. It definitely wasn't built on the same plot of land as the FNaF 1 location. We know that because they had to eventually find Springtrap somewhere leading up to Night 2 of FNaF 3, which means that the FNaF 1 building had to exist at the same time as Fazbear's Fright. So no, not every single building was on the exact same plot of land. But was it close by? Well, I'm pretty sure everything else was, so I don't think that's too much of a stretch. And speaking of things that were built close by, let's talk about FNaF 2 now. Now, in FNaF 2 itself, we really don't have anything to go off of. The line where Fredbear's Family Diner gets brought up leads some people to believe that it may or may not be on the same plot of land, but I'm not going to delve too much into that, because honestly, it's just one line from several years ago. However, that doesn't mean that there's nothing to say about the FNaF 2 location, because we actually get a lot to say about it in Help Wanted. In one of the vent repair minigames, specifically the ennard one, we're brought to Circus Baby's entertainment and rental. And in the blacklight version of it specifically, we can see remnants of the FNaF 2 animatronics everywhere. The withered and toy animatronics have only ever appeared in one location, the FNaF 2 one. And if it's directly above Circus Babies, then yeah, the FNaF 2 location is 100% in the Fazburger with everything else. Though, considering the state of everything else that we see in this building, I'd say that FNaF 2 has been closed for a while now. Moving on to our final game. When it comes to FNaF 1, just like FNaF 2, nothing in the game gives us any form of information. But we do have stuff from the week before, which is the one book that everyone seems to be taking as fully canon to the games. Specifically, we have this section right here, on night 4, where Ralph starts going through the vents in the building. When Ralph starts going through the vents, a few things can happen. But the most notable thing is that he almost always gets incredibly lost. Despite knowing the layout of the building like the back of his hand, these vents go on forever, and seem to not make any sense. There's even a scene where it says that he's literally been lost for days. The point being, these vents are way too expansive for just one building. Especially in a building that he knows so well. He wouldn't be getting so lost in the vents if he knew exactly where he was going the whole time. But evidently, he doesn't. He even stumbles upon rooms that he doesn't even recognize. So honestly, I think this is a pretty big point in favor of FNaF 1 being literally connected to everything else in the series. And speaking of connections, there's one in particular that I'm reminded of. While Ralph is going through these vents, there's a point in time where he stumbles across a dead end. Literally. He finds an actual bone in the vents. Now, I don't know about you, but when I think of a bone in the vents, there's one particular place where my mind goes. Sister Location. The game where we are literally told about a time that someone was found dead in the vents. This is the only other time that this happens, and as we established earlier, Sea Bears is the area that's probably the most confirmed to be a part of the Fazburger. So, considering how expansive the vent system is in the FNaF 1 location, including rooms that Ralph doesn't recognize and literal human remains, yeah, I think it's safe to say that FNaF 1 is a part of this as well. And, well, that's kind of it. If you think that the hub world from Help Wanted 1 is a real location, then that's also on the bottommost layer since that's exactly what Proto Freddy's looks like. But apart from that, there's nothing else to really talk about for the Fazburger, except for the implications of it. What do I mean by that? Well, think of it like this. What's next for the series? After Secret of the Mimic, what plot points are left to uncover? Well, besides the DLC for the game that's planned, there's still one more game that I think Steelwool has to make. The game that goes over the conclusion of Cassie's story. At the end of Ruin, she falls in the elevator all the way down to the 4th layer, underneath the MCM layer where the Mimic chases her. Now, if everything else about the Fazburger is true, then we actually have a decent idea of what this 4th layer is and what we're going to find in it. For the most part, it's going to be whatever's left of the R&D department and Proto Freddy's. A lot of it was probably destroyed in the sinkhole, but I imagine that there's still some bits and pieces of it here and there. I don't want to speculate too much right now, because I'd much rather do that in its own dedicated video. I think that if I really tried hard enough, I could come up with a lot of ideas for what we're going to see in the inevitable sequel to this game. And I want to put more thought into it before I start saying things out loud. But for right now, I can go over a few basic points. I think that Cassie, and probably Roxy, are going to be exploring the 4th layer together, kind of like how Gregory and Glamrock Freddy were exploring the Pizzaplex together. For the most part, it's going to be a cavernous area, but there will be a few remnants of whatever's left of MCM's R&D department, specifically the Proto Freddy's area. And considering how sinkholes work, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a few things from Sister Location here and there as well. Sinkholes don't bring everything down in a straight line. It usually breaks things up and everything gets all disconnected. That's why we have the scooper in the same layer as MCM, despite the fact that Sister Location's bunker was definitely built underneath it. I think that we'll be able to see some of what's left of the bunker on the 4th layer as well. As for what we're actually going to be doing in this game, well, I don't want to get too far into that yet. Like I said, I want that to be its own dedicated video in the future, so I won't say everything that I have here. Just know that Steelwool still has potential to do a lot of things for this sequel, and I'm honestly really excited to see how it turns out, but we'll talk about that in another video. For now, I'm gonna end things off here. Thanks for watching. It took me longer to get this video out than I would have liked, but it's finally done, and hopefully it does pretty well, because I am a firm believer in the Fazburger being a real thing. And hopefully, people understand where I'm coming from with it. And either in my next video, or in another video sometime in the future, I'll be going over what my predictions are for the next game, using the 4th layer of Fazburger as my basis for what I think is going to happen. So, with all of that out of the way, make sure you all like and subscribe, and if you're feeling really generous, become a member. Every bit of support helps. Until next time, take it easy.